But right now I have the pleasure of introducing Shelly Brunswick to you. Shelly is the Chief Operating Officer for the Space Foundation. She brings a broad perspective and a deep vision of the global ecosystem, from a distinguished career as a space acquisition and program management leader and a congressional liaison for the United States Air Force, to her current role at the Space Foundation, including overseeing the Center for Innovation and Education, the Symposium 365, and the Global Alliance. Shelly is an advocate for space technology, innovation, entrepreneurship, diversity, and inclusion. Shelly collaborates with organizations around the world to connect the commercial, government, and educational sectors. Not only is Shelly brilliant in her expertise and her knowledge in the space sector, she cares deeply and has a passion to help all people succeed in every area of her life. I have seen this firsthand. Truly, Shelly has a heart as big as the universe. Thank you, Shelly, for truly being a leading role model for all professionals in the space ecosystem, just like the others on your panel. You're bringing hope for a brighter future. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Michelle. I just want to confirm, can you hear me?
I can.
Perfect. Well, thank you. And David, thank you. It's an honor to be joining you and General Levy and General Radigi today. And I want to thank all your sponsors for making this possible. Today, we have a really exciting panel with leaders in the space sector. They happen to just all be women. And I'd like to invite them to all join me coming up on the screen as well, Women Leading Space. And what I'd like to highlight is we may all be women leading in space, but this panel discussion is not going to be about women leading in space. It's going to be about leaders in the space industry. And so we're going to ask some hard-hitting questions. And I have three amazing panelists joining me today: Erin Miller, Nicole Robinson, and Laura Fordyce. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce each of them and give them an opportunity to provide an opening statement. So first, I'll start with Erin Miller. Hi, Erin.
Hi, Shelly.
Erin has over a decade of experience building meaningful technical collaborations and has formed hundreds of formal partnerships between government, industry, and academia to solve problems for warfighters and national security. Currently, Erin is building a public-private partnership called Space Isac. This is the third nonprofit that Erin has launched and has led, and is passionate about public-private partnerships for her entire career. Also, she serves on the advisory board of CyberSat.gov. Erin, thank you. And would you like to provide us with your opening statement?
Sure. Thanks for having me, everyone. I'm so glad to be here. So glad to be on this panel with these great women, and having Shelly as our moderator. I really look forward to the discussion that we're going to get to have. So just a little bit of background about myself. I am the executive director of Space Isac, and the way that I got here is by being a nonprofit entrepreneur. So I really, just to give you a little bit more about myself, I view myself as a champion for causes, and I like to do that through nonprofits. I really love to bring together communities for collaboration that normally don't get to collaborate. So the public-private sector partnership that I'm working on right now, also championing small business advocacy to get engaged in cybersecurity for space, has been great fun for me. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to the discussion.
Awesome. Thank you, Erin. Next, I'd like to introduce Nicole Robinson. So Nicole brings more than 15 years of satellite industry expertise, leadership skills, and business development experience to her role as president of Ursa Space. Previously, Nicole was at Global Satellite Operator, SES. She served as Senior Vice President of Global Government, and she serves as the President at Space and Satellite Professionals International. SSPI is one of the largest professional space industry associations. Thank you, Nicole, for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Shelly. And I certainly echo the comments made by others and even in the chat of all the great work that you've done in this industry and in the community. So really appreciate all that effort. As you mentioned, it just recently made that transition from SES now to leading Ursa Space. And though both companies are in the same space and satellite industry, they have very different capabilities. One of the things I found compelling that I'd like to talk about today are some of the areas of commonality between the two. And that really centers around this emerging growth for data, for access to data. certainly when we look at the youngest generation of technology natives, access to data is like access to air or water. It's an entitlement, something that they crave. Similarly, when it comes to satellite intelligence and imagery, as in the case of what we're doing at Ursa Space, access to real-time information and changes anywhere in the world, it's become critical to a variety of different communities and growing at an unbelievable pace. So suffice it to say, the space and satellite industry is changing dynamically to these demands. And one thing I've seen in particular is those companies that have been agile, continue to enhance their technologies and capabilities with an acute focus on those demands are and will continue to do really well. So excited to talk more about that on this panel.
Well, thank you, Nicole. And next, I'd like to introduce Laura Forcic. Laura is the owner of space consulting firm Astrolytical, specializing in space science, industry, and policy, and offering space career coaching services. She is a NASA subject matter expert for planetary science missions and serves on the advisory boards for the Lifeboat Foundation and the Society of Women in Space Exploration. She is a mentor for the Brooke Owens Fellowship Program and the author of Rise of the Space Age Millennials, the Space Aspirations of a Rising Generation. Thank you, Laura, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on. So space being for everyone globally is a big passion of mine. And I mean that in two ways. One being access to space data, which we know is invaluable in so many different areas, and physical access, whether that is hardware or people. And when it comes to encouraging people to get involved in space, I have had the opportunity to work with many people through my previous employer, CASIS, or ISS National Lab, talking about how to utilize the International Space Station and the LEO environment in general on bringing space access to a variety of industries that have never thought that before. And now with my own company, working with clients and individuals. Also within my book that I released last year, I'm going to be releasing a second edition. It looks at millennials and soon Generation Z in how they were inspired to get involved in space and what they hope to accomplish. And that has really been a stark contrast between the older view of space being for engineers and the newer view of space being for pretty much every single discipline out there in one way or another. And then I'm also writing a second book right now for space tourism and private space flight, looking at how people can physically get involved and fly in the future if they wish to. So I'm really looking forward to being part of this panel.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Well, the first thing I'm going to share is, Erin seems to be the one person who's a little different than us because she's in the cyber realm. But we heard from the earlier panel today with General Levy and Laura Nelsenberger that space and cyber are really connected. So Erin, I'd like to open the question to you first is, what is Space Isac and why does it exist and how is it interconnected with the space industry we're used to?
Yeah, well, the Space Isac is the Space Information Sharing and Analysis Center. So we're doing information sharing on all threats and all hazards. It's not just cybersecurity, although that is a huge factor that's at play. ISACs are chartered to really focus on cybersecurity threats, but we know that the space sector cannot just limit itself to focus on cybersecurity because there's so much interconnected nature between our physical and cyber threats. So we launched the Space Isac in 2019. It's not a very old nonprofit. We launched it through an announcement from the White House. We had a group at the White House called the S&T Partnership Forum that was working on a study to determine where to go from here on bridging the gap between the public and private sector for sharing information. And the model that they recommended using is the ISAC model. It's tested and proven. The first ISAC came out in 1998, and there's one for almost every sector. So there's about 30 ISACs. And space getting its own ISAC is really a major milestone for the sector. So we're very privileged and honored that we're able to operate the ISAC out of the National Cybersecurity Center. And Space ISAC will continue to grow its capabilities over the coming years. So we've declared publicly our IOC. We have a formal partnership with DHS, and we're working on formal partnership with a variety of other agencies. And we are targeting having 40 members this year. So we're really excited about the progress. And I dropped the 3-letter acronym IOC a second ago, but I didn't explain that. That is our initial operating capability. And so to hit that milestone is really big. We're on track to have a watch center that the Space Isac will use. So we'll physically access that, and we'll have remote capability to have all of our members have access to timely, actionable information to be able to respond to threats and vulnerabilities for the space industry. And the intent is to have a global reach. So we're taking a multi-decade approach to bring together commercial, international, and government collaboration. So this is not limited to just US-based companies. Although some ISACs do take that approach, we can't really limit space to just the US. So we have members from all across the globe, and we know that we're dependent upon each other for global security. So it's been a great collaboration to be able to launch, and looking forward to the coming years.
Well, thank you, Erin. That was really helpful. And I think that shares a little bit of how intertwined cyber and space are. And I'll have a follow-on question for you shortly. But what I want to do is talk with Nicole a little bit more. Because Nicole, as you shared in your opening statement, there are a lot of things going on. So what I'd like to ask you is, in the SATCOM and SAR imagery markets, there's been a rapid trend increasing in terms of data segment demands across the community. As you recently transitioned from 14 years at SES on the satellite communication side, now to leading URSA space in the SAR community, what do you attribute this demand, and how do you see it shaping the market globally going forward?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that's absolutely the case. So I was mentioning in the opening comments, this access to data is critical. It's completely shaped the way that we operate, and is something that I think has been further entrenched over the way that we're able to connect and we're able to share. Certainly in the satellite communications domain, that required getting closer to the customer and the customer requirements, much more of a solutions orientation. So beginning with the customer's capability or the need that they had, and tailoring a solution to meet that need. This is particularly true in the data domain. So gone are the years in satellite communications of lighting up a transponder, sending out a lease agreement, and sending a customer on their way. Instead, now it requires a degree of customer intimacy to understand that end use application. The same is true for SAR and data analytics. Well, in SAR, I mean synthetic aperture radar, or even in Earth observation. At Ursa Space, what we do is we bring in from a myriad of different constellations all of those different capabilities into our platform, and what we produce is an analytic. So it's not just a matter of providing imagery or what we're looking to do is to give actionable data analytics. So in the form that a customer can make a decision, or do something preventatively, or respond to a change that they've seen, say in the case of humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. So this growing demand for access to data, access to satellite intelligence is here to stay. And I think you're seeing a correlating response from the industry in terms of the number of investments that are being made as well, and seeing that continue to be the case.
Excellent, thank you. I did see, as we were wrapping up the prior panel with Steve Osakowicz, there was a question asking about multiple careerways and pathways into the space industry and how we need to create more pathways. The Space Foundation does have a workforce development roadmap that includes awareness, access, training, connecting, and mentoring. So Laura, this next question is for you, since you do space career coaching, and you're also a mentor for the Brooke Owens Fellowship Program. What role does mentorship play in the global space ecosystem?
Yeah, I would say it's vital. And mentorship is a broad term. It doesn't necessarily need to be someone in the space industry. It doesn't need to be the same discipline. It doesn't need to be a woman mentoring a woman. And you know, there are so many different ways to mentor. But I think what's really valuable is having people in place in positions where they can inspire others. And there's a phrase out there that's used a lot, you can't be what you can't see. I don't entirely agree with it, because there are those people who are breaking new ground, but it sure helps to be able to see those people who are paving new paths, to then be able to emulate them, or to get inspired by them, to then say, I want to do something like that person. And there's no doubt about it that when it comes to who's inspiring the next generations, it's the people that are involved in the newer space industries, you know, like Elon Musk, for example, you know, SpaceX, Virgin Galactic, Blue Origin, like these newer companies that are coming on board and really doing groundbreaking things. NASA still inspires, no doubt about it, but there's now a variety of different paths forward. And it's not necessarily has to be, you know, the right stuff kind of astronaut that inspires either. They have the Inspiration 4 mission that SpaceX is going to launch soon that has 4 very different people from different backgrounds. One of them who has survived cancer as a child. So there are these people who are then going to be able to inspire the next generation to say, that person looks like me, or that person's been through something like me, or that person has a disability. The European Space Agency just put out a call for astronauts, and one of them is specifically looking for disabilities. So it's really important to have the mentors out there, and it could be just a casual acquaintance, or it could be a formal mentorship program like the Space Foundation and others offer. So I really encourage people, especially younger, you know, students or young professionals out there who want to reach out, just go ahead and reach out to someone who inspires you, and maybe you can start a relationship there and learn how you can get involved and get on a path that is either similar to your mentor or completely different, independent of them, to be truly who you want to become.
Excellent. So what I'd like to do is, I kind of want to ask all our panelists, who is your mentor or was a mentor? And can you share with us the best advice they've given you in your career? So Laura, since we just allowed you to tee up mentorship, we'll go to you first.
Oh, that's tough, because I've had so many great people who have helped me along the way. So I can't really say that I had one mentor. Through my different paths and the different stages of my life, I've had people who's encouraged me, because I can't tell you how many times I thought I should quit or go off and do something different. And I think that it's really the people who say that you can do it. I know you can. I know you have that within you, that are the best people to keep around. And don't keep around someone who is, you know, negative, who says you shouldn't do this or you can't do this, because that's not who you're looking for. Maybe they need to give you that tough advice that you're on the wrong path and you need to pivot a little bit, or, you know, go a different way, and that's okay. But you need to have yourself surrounded by positive, influential people who can really make a difference in your motivation. I think that's really key.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, Erin, let me ask you, you know, do you have a mentor you'd like to share, or the great piece of advice that mentor may have given you in your career journey?
Well, I've had some great mentors, most definitely. Some of my mentors actually have set a bad example. And that's how I learned from them, is by them saying, you know what, I messed up and you should not actually do it that way. So that's been great to be able to have so many different types of mentors. And I think recently, one of the best pieces of advice that I got was about trust. So it was, you know, just because someone violates your trust doesn't mean you don't trust other people going forward. And that's really important, especially in the industry that I'm in, because it's all about information sharing. So we do have to have a little bit of grace for each other if we're going to actually do information sharing.
Great point, trust. So Nicole, I've come to you last because I would like to disclose that Nicole was a mentor for me when I was transitioning out of the Air Force. And she gave me some excellent advice and insight as I started my journey in the civil sector and the civilian world. So thank you, Nicole. So I'm going to ask you about who may have been a good mentor for you. You don't have to name their name, but what advice may they have given you in your journey?
Yeah, thank you so much for saying that, Shelly. I really appreciate that. That pulls at the heartstrings for sure. And I think it kind of follows the guidance that I had received in the past, and that's about the unintentional mentor. So just to be reminded that there are those in your peer community, there are those who are the next generation, there are those who maybe are senior to you as well in your ecosystem that are watching, and they're paying attention to the sort of things that you are prioritizing your time and energy on, and to be mindful of that responsibility. And you may not see yourself as occupying that spot of a mentor, but for someone you are. And you do have a responsibility to take the steps to leave a situation better than you found it, and to take the capabilities that you have to really enrich the environment that you're in. So I think the unintentional mentor is something that I have heard for a long time from my mentor, who's Tip Oster-Thaler. And I like to live by that, act as though someone is paying attention, and that your words and your actions make a difference.
Excellent insight. Always set the example. And we do have a question, so I'm just going to, there are some great organizations if you're looking for a mentor. Women Tech Network, the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs has a Space for Women networking program. And I always recommend SGAC. And of course, the Space Foundation has our New Gen Young Professionals program. So if you're looking for a mentor, those could be some great places to start, as well as with the networking. So now I'm going to come back to Aaron, and let's talk about space and cyber and how they interact with other industries like finance, transportation, and why is it important to have this cross-sector collaboration?
Yeah, thanks, Shelly. One of the things that is going to be really important for Space Isac, and we've already started working on, is cross-sector collaboration. We're a member of the National Council of ISACs, and so that's important. So we have a direct route to be able to collaborate with all of the 30 ISACs or so. There's probably even more than 30, to be honest with you, but there's a website if you're interested. That's the National Council of ISACs.org. You can check out all of them. So we'll be actively collaborating with the Auto ISAC, the National Defense ISAC, Communications ISAC, Aviation, and IT ISAC. And in particular, we really want to maintain these types of collaborations because space systems do impact a lot of critical infrastructures. There's an earthbound reliance, you could call it, on space assets, where we've created a dependency for a lot of our daily activities. Our standard of living, our expectations for services that exist depend on space assets being available and space systems functioning properly and not and being able to respond to attack. So some examples of that are even our Walmarts, our post offices, our food supply chain, our communications, our next generation communications, emergency response, and in particular fire response. So emergency response is generally 911 response, but also fire. So there's a lot of reliance that we have on our space systems, and whenever there's a cyber attack that takes place on the terrestrial network, it could actually start to impact our space layer network as well. So we have to be very cognizant of how the traditional terrestrial layer network has that interplay and interconnectedness with our space layer network.
Excellent. Before I jump to another question, Laura, Nicole, did you want to add anything into that, cross-sector collaboration, or how space and cyber impact more than what some people might think of NASA or just military space? Or you tell me if you want a piece of that question.
I think she dropped the microphone on it.
Okay, mic drop.
Aaron's got it covered.
All right. So Laura, I'm going to pivot to you, and Aaron, you may want a piece of this one as well. So, and Nicole, you may want a piece as well from your international perspective, but the Space Foundation has an entrepreneurial program called Space Commerce to encourage more individuals to pursue space entrepreneurship. Both you and Aaron have worked in developing space technology strategies. So I welcome your thoughts about technology transfer, emerging space technology, and how we can help to inspire more entrepreneurship. So first with you, Laura.
It goes both ways. It's technology that's developed for space can be used in a variety of different industries, and vice versa. Technology developed elsewhere. It's helpful to not think of space as one monolithic industry, because it's not. It's just another place to do business or to do security. There's really nothing that separates space from everything else, except that it's newer and harder to get to and more expensive to get to right now. But the technologies that are used in space can in ways that we haven't even thought of and in ways that we didn't predict, help the entire world. Like the people who launched the GPS satellites, did they know that GPS was going to run our entire modern society, for example? And I love that aspect of any technology, whether it's space or not. And I'm a physicist at my core. So just the physics involved in how do you do this fundamental research that creates these fantastic new technologies that better our planet. And that is something that I had ingrained for me from my very first job at the ISS National Lab, is that we do space to better life on Earth, to better humanity, and hopefully to better our future off Earth. And I think that it's really important to keep in mind that when we are spending money in the space industry or space government, it's not just money lost. It's money that really affects and influences and benefits so many different societies, so many different people, so many different communities. And I think that a lot of people get that misunderstanding that the money spent in space is wasted, but it's not, because there are trickle effects through all the technologies and all the applications. And even if we don't see it immediately, it changes our world.
Excellent. Erin, did you want to add some thoughts? Because in addition to Erin's role at Space Isac, you also worked at a space incubator. So I'd really like to hear your thoughts on the tech transfer as well.
Yeah, I could probably talk about technology transfer, innovation, entrepreneurship for a while. I've had a great opportunity to be able to experience this from multiple angles now. And so when I was working in technology transfer, then I had exposure to all of the federal labs and being able to see the amount of funding that's being invested in our federal research and development and the capabilities that are coming out of that. And I know, Laura, you've had some experience with that too. It's just remarkable what we're investing, the dollar amounts, and then also the inventions that are coming out, and the fact that they're all available to anyone who's in the private sector to be able to license and utilize is one aspect of the space industry that I think a lot of people don't think about daily now, because we've moved towards this model where we have low barriers to entry, and it's very easy for a startup or small business to be able to get into the space sector, become part of the industry, and it can be through multiple avenues, like artificial intelligence, machine learning, I know was brought up in an earlier panel. So, I mean, even if you think about the fact that we need HR professionals that understand the space industry, there's a variety of different ways you can get involved in this burgeoning field. So I think I'd like to just remind our audience members that what types of investments we've been making in federal R&D all this time, and think about the small businesses and startups and encourage them to be able to go to our federal labs and find out what patents and technology they have and what partnerships they can form to be able to build on what they're doing. Because I recently visited NTIA, and NTIA is doing a lot of research into 5G and RF and communications and spectrum. So there's not billions, probably millions of dollars being invested in that research in a federal lab that's, in Boulder, Colorado. If you're in the area, check it out and see what types of resources are available.
Excellent. Nicole, did you want to comment on tech transfer or the global space ecosystem? I know you spent time also internationally, so your thoughts on what that global space ecosystem looks like could be very valuable.
Yeah, thanks for that. One of the things that I think is quite valuable is a perspective that, if you imagine like Swiss cheese, one slice of Swiss cheese has a bunch of different holes in it. The next slice is going to look entirely different. If you line up a bunch of different slices of Swiss cheese, you're going to get a solid block before long. And I think there's this tendency in the global technology ecosystem when it comes to space that one is better than the other, or that there's only one tool for every job. And I think if we take a more layered approach when it comes to planning for space architectures, where there is a role for multiple orbits, for multiple frequencies in that case, or in the synthetic aperture radar and Earth observation domain, there's a role for those different attributes as well. And when you layer those different capabilities, you get that stronger result at the end of the day. So working together, I think, as a global community of different space-based capabilities, we will net a much stronger product than any one of us alone.
That's excellent. Let me follow that up because I have a follow-on for that. In the SAR and Earth observation domain, what are the key growth drivers of demand over the next 2 years in particular? And are they different in the commercial sector versus the government sector?
Yeah, maybe a couple different areas I might highlight here. Certainly in the economic community. So we continue to witness here economic and environmental factors starting to come together. And in that way, you might imagine the economic impact of renewables, for example, and what that means from a data analytics and SAR demand perspective. In that way, we're able to contribute much more meaningfully in to global environmental challenges with key economic indicators that enable a position of doing good and making a profit simultaneously. It's kind of a nice combination of those two pursuits. In maritime, this is another key growth driver for the radar and Earth observation community for sure. We're finding a number of different areas of growth around maritime domain awareness. Port traffic, for example, is a key area of satellite intelligence interest. Dark vessel detection and activities, predictive shipping routes to understand where vessels may be best positioned to reduce idle time in port. Outside of that, in the government domain, I would suggest global security is an emerging trend and rapid growth driver as well for the radar community. Some of those key mission areas are, you might imagine, border surveillance, tactical intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, missile defense, and maritime, again, as it pertains to naval organizations.
Thank you. That's great. So I'm going to ask a question, and Erin, you may want the first piece, but do you consider space a critical infrastructure? And if so, why? Or why not?
Well, for all the reasons that have been discussed, and especially the list that Nicole, you just gave of what we're using space assets and space systems for, then I would say absolutely yes.
Laura, Nicole, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say that to me, critical infrastructure are things that we take for granted, but we can't imagine life without. And space is absolutely filling that void. There are so many different areas that Erin and Nicole have mentioned, and also things that we haven't mentioned that we just don't even think about because it's part of our everyday lives, the communication, the positioning and timing, weather. I mean, it's all critical to our modern society and critical to disaster relief, to people's everyday lives of working in fields or oceans or wherever the case may be. And so even as simple as taking your cell phone out into the rural areas and being able to do satellite internet. And so, yeah, it's absolutely critical. Now, can we get away without it if we want to get, much primitive in our society and not progress? Yes, but we don't want to. So critical infrastructure is something that helps us grow society, and space absolutely does.
Excellent. Nicole, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Laura and Erin said it so well, and just to kind of foot stomp what they say, it is absolutely critical infrastructure, but really it should be planned for and procured accordingly. If we all believe that, then we shouldn't plan for it and purchase it as a commodity. It should be planned for in a much more strategic, thoughtful way to ensure that access is, as Laura said, not taken for granted, but instead it's deliberately planned. It's purchased in a wise, long-term, financially and technology advantageous way.
Well, I think that's an excellent point, Nicole, and that really ties in with your background with government policy. What role do you feel government does play in space and cyber and that infrastructure and ways forward? What do you think is coming, and what should we be looking at, and good policy, what would that be?
Yeah, I think in that regard, there's a longstanding myth that government, whether this be US, NATO, those with whom we have mutual defense agreements, shouldn't be engaging industry directly, or that they would be in some way at odds if they were to do this from a competitive vantage point and have the look of impropriety to one group over another. I think it's time we debunk that myth, because without frequent, early, and often engagement between government and industry, they won't have the ability to plan and procure space and satellite capabilities in that way that is reflective of it being critical infrastructure. So I think it's kind of a lofty message, but it's absolutely true. Since you know it's so pivotal, engage early and often with communities, small businesses, big businesses, consortia, reach out to a number of different industry organizations, Space Foundation, SSPI. These groups can help bring the right folks to the table and help shape the very capability that you need to sustain the critical missions that governments have worldwide.
Excellent points.
I jump in, Shelly.
Yeah, jump in.
Have mentioned that if we think about space as a critical infrastructure, I agree, Nicole, we need to plan for that, right? So we need to think about, is space stations, private space stations in LEO, is that going to be part of our critical infrastructure now that the International Space Station is probably at near its end of its life? So we need to plan for these things. If we're not just talking about satellites that look down, we're also thinking about how we as a humanity can go outward. So is space stations critical infrastructure? Is cislunar space critical infrastructure? Lunar, we need to start planning these things very methodically. You're absolutely right, Nicole.
Yeah, and I can add to that too. And just, I want to comment that the public-private partnership, part of the benefit of it is that in Space Isac, then there's public sector partners that have information. We know they have a lot of information and some of it is classified, but at what point in time do we acknowledge the fact that some of this information needs to be shared with our small, medium-sized companies that are in the commercial sector that don't otherwise have access to it unless we give them that access, make sure that they are aware of these threats and vulnerabilities in the right time, which is timely, so that they can make good decisions and protect the critical infrastructure that they own and operate. And another thought that occurred to me, Laura, when you're talking is that policies that we set associated with space being critical infrastructure need to acknowledge the next generation. Like, what are the anticipated dependencies that our next generations are going to have on space assets via being connected to their cell phone, or essentially tethered to their cell phone? They're tethered to a space asset maybe as well. So what are the implications as we get more and more hyper connected, and the interplay and interdependencies get stronger and stronger over time?
Excellent. The data point I'll throw out is we all use GPS. We don't think about using GPS. And not only is GPS benefiting our lives, are we dependent on it for a multitude of things, from transportation to food supply chains. But we also know that it's created great economic opportunities. Since 1983, it's added about $1.4 trillion to just the US economic opportunities. So again, I think all of you highlighted the importance that good policy can help lay the framework, the planning, and then again, the dollars that are needed to ensure we have a reliable, stable space infrastructure that, again, as Erin's sitting here as our cyber expert, but really a space expert, space and cyber are intertwined. So thank you all. So Erin, I'm going to come back to you, and with that cyber hat on, and of course, Laura and Nicole, you can jump in too. But can you describe for me the cyber threat that keeps you up at night? And what is that? And how should we be working to prevent that from happening?
Well, right now, I think the talk of the day is about solar winds. So it's a supply chain threat. Something that has happened in the supply chain, either corrupted components or nefarious activity that's gotten, a 0-day attack occurring that's affecting the space community. That's something that we're talking about on a regular basis within the Space Isac. We're actually even looking to run an exercise that will model that scenario and walk us through, what happens when we have a SolarWinds-like attack on the space industry. What are the impacts that could play out, and are we prepared? So what are all the companies that would be involved in this particular scenario going to have in place in order to anticipate their crisis response? And then probably most importantly is, how does Space Isac assist the community in that response, or in identifying the threat on the front end? And how do we bring together subgroups of the community, vendors, supply chain, small business, and the primes, and our international community as well, acknowledging all facets of our global space community in our response and what the activities that lead up to this type of attack.
Thank you, Erin. Laura and Nicole, did you want to add anything?
As the astrophysicist here, I assume I'm just very heartened that people are paying attention to that, whether it's a deliberate attack or whether it's just simply space weather. Now that we're leaving the solar minimum and heading towards solar maximum, it's going to really impact a lot of our infrastructure on the ground and in space that we take it for granted. So I'm really glad to hear, Erin, that people are paying attention to that and planning for it.
And maybe the only other thing I'd add to that is, the degree of sophistication of these cross-domain attacks has really increased in recent months and years. And so I think another area we might give further consideration is sharing with similar space providers in our ecosystem, sharing what we have experienced and our best practices at deterring and thwarting those attacks. Because I think as an industry, if we're able to come together and share those best practices, we will learn much more rapidly than each individual organization trying to do so on their own, and will be much stronger ultimately together.
Absolutely. And I'm sure everyone's heard, it's on CNBC. It's not anything we haven't heard about the ransomware, cyber attacks, and they're on the rise. And again, for national security purposes, you're always looking for the weakest link in the chain. But even if you're not in national security, if you're in other areas of the economy, that price of not having cybersecurity is critical. So what I'm going to do is, so Laura, I'm going to ask you a unique question because you just shared with us you're writing a couple other books, but I want to start with, you did write a book called Rise of the Space Millennials, the Space Aspirations of a Rising Generation. What inspired you to write this book, and what did you learn during the process?
As someone who is a member of the millennial generation on the older side, I felt that millennials weren't fairly represented a few years ago when I got the idea for the book. And then just, what was it, a year and a half ago, when everyone was thinking about the 50th anniversary of the Apollo landing. I think that's a fantastic commemorates, but millennials weren't there for that. That didn't necessarily inspire us. It inspired me in the sense that I learned about it in school, but we didn't witness it. So I wanted to figure out from a generation that didn't have that inspiration of Apollo, how did we get inspired, and what different preferences do we have working with space? For example, an older idea that is still very popular within government circles is that you have to have America first, America leadership. But if you're talking about a younger generation, it's much more international, much more global, much more interconnected. Space is inherently global. And so millennials, and I'm finding now Generation Z, think of it in terms more of bringing space together as an entire planet, not even thinking about those national boundaries. And I'm really pleased to see some of the ways that inclusivity and equity and these kinds of topics, diversity, is really ingrained in the millennial and Generation Z mindset, which is something that definitely was not a factor back during the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo era. So I'm really pleased to see that trending in a good direction. And we still have much more to progress and much farther to go, but we're getting there.
Excellent. So Nicole, let me come back with you a little bit and talk about, in terms of the domino effect, how does the entrance of a number of new constellations impact the technical advancements and cost points for other aspects of the satellite ecosystem? For example, is there a direct correlation between the cost of certain providers across the value chain and the number of new constellations going up?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think what I've observed in the couple of months that I've been serving as president of VersaSpace, it's pretty phenomenal what's possible today in terms of measuring changes, movements on Earth. I began with just a moment of amazement at what the platform can do, and only imagine how that will be shaped and enhanced in the months and years ahead. When we look at the increasing launches in the radar community and Earth observation community, when there's a doubling of SAR satellites alone from January this year to the end of this year, and even more so in 2022. So with that being said, I would imagine that there would be a correlating effect between supply and price point, at least in certain areas. There would be, you can assume price point advantages in some areas where additional capability and more efficient capabilities brought online. In other areas where there's more specialized and a unique value proposition that's deployed, a unique technology that's presented, those vendors are likely to hold on to premium pricing for longer. It's just natural, both in the SAR and EO community, as well as you'd see that in satellite communications as well. But in all cases, I am really confident in the strength and unique positioning of those who are able to serve in a role of bringing in a number, we talked about that Swiss cheese effect. We can bring in a number of different technologies into a common platform and extract the analytic from that. So there's actionable data at the end of the day. I think that's where the strength is. Of course, I'm self-serving in saying that because I do think URSA plays such a valuable role in that we operate with all of the SAR and EO and RF mapping providers, bring all of it into our platform, layer it with an algorithm and produce an analytic. But even in the satellite communications domain, you can imagine that being the perspective where if you're able to deliver multiple orbits, multiple frequencies, and give access to data at the end of the day, rather than just a pipe of bandwidth, you'll differentiate yourselves. And I think you can protect your price points in that process. Yeah, so I think yes, the natural response in the market would be with increasing assets in the sky. There's going to be downward pricing pressure on, the individual elements. So bringing them together in a way that's usable, I think, is going to be where the value is really felt.
Excellent. Aaron or Laura, did you want to add anything to that? I'll go with no. So I have an interesting question. And this is a more, and Nicole, you'll be an expert in this area too. It relates to how do you help get the message out to others. But why is the cyber threat or the space infrastructure so difficult for audiences to comprehend and address? So Aaron, if I could ask that of you first to address it on the cyber side, and then Laura and Nicole, you can talk about the cyber or space. But we do know there is a perception of they can't see cyber, so they don't understand the investment, and you can't see space, so why are we spending this money in space when there are other problems here on Earth? So Aaron, I'll start with you.
So I think if we're talking about general public awareness and understanding of cyber and space, yeah, your question makes a point. It's very hard to wrap your head around all of those things if you're not even closely related to the industry. And since a lot of it is very invisible, and you have to understand A+, get your A+, so that you have a basic understanding of how networks and computers work and the what's in your cell phone, what's in your computer, and then start extrapolating upon that and think about, well, now what's in space, because we have computers flying in space now too, and then how they're connected with one another. So I do think that we can teach that at an earlier age. It is very comprehensible. So someone could learn this probably in early elementary school if we start distilling the principles down and make it part of K through 12 education. I believe that wholeheartedly. And I also have a 2-year-old and I know what he can learn. So I have a lot of confidence that it's very possible that we can increase our understanding of what's in our hands, the cybersecurity risks that we're exposed to daily that we individually need to manage, and then also start to understand what's in space as well.
I take an alternate view. Oh, sorry, Nicole, go on.
Please.
I take an alternate view in that I don't think we necessarily need to increase awareness through the entire population, because people don't care unless it affects them directly in a negative way. Usually nobody really cared about pandemics and vaccines except the people who worked in those industries until it affects you directly, right? Like all of us. And so I think that what our job is to make sure that it doesn't affect the general society negatively by doing our jobs correctly, to make sure that we have cybersecurity in place, we have space infrastructure in place. The only people we need to convince are the stakeholders, whether that is investors, other industries who are partners, Congress and the White House, making sure that we have the money flowing and the regulations and the policies and all of that going in the right direction. That way we can continue to have modern society live their lives without being even aware that cybersecurity attacks are happening, or the satellites might collide into each other if we're not careful. That kind of stuff is important and vital and does not need to be on everyone's mind. So I think it's our jobs to make sure that we take care of our business so that other people are safe and don't have to.
Yeah, I think the cyber element of that was covered well. Certainly in the education and outreach topic, Erin mentioned she has a 2-year-old, had a similar experience where I have 3 children, but my 7-year-old and 6-year-old were playing outside, and my 6-year-old said, "Oh, look, there's a satellite on the roof." And my 7-year-old said, "It's not a satellite, it's a satellite dish." It was one of those moments where you thought, okay, we have some work to do. And I think, space sometimes is so, frankly, intangible, because you can't touch it, you can't interact with it, you don't necessarily have that connective tissue with it. So I think it is our responsibility to show the exciting and dynamic side of it, so that we're encouraging those and generations, to come to get engaged. We have a responsibility to leave it in a much more dynamic and accessible place than we found it. I know of a number of groups who are looking to do that and increase diversity in STEM fields as it pertains to space and elsewhere. We created a group within SSPI, the Space and Satellite Professionals International, called WISE, which is Women in Space Engagement. And one of the committees that have been formed is about STEM outreach and engaging with Girl Scout troops and engaging with different communities to show them how dynamic and important and critical to our day-to-day lives. As Laura said, you don't always realize, just how important it is to our infrastructure and way of life. And making sure that becomes commonplace, I think, is something we all take with us as a responsibility.
I think that segues really well into my next question. Let me put you in the mentor chair. What advice do you have for other young men and women or mid-career who are looking to enter the space industry? How do they enter? What should they know to prepare themselves to take their place amongst us in the space industry? So what is the mentoring thing you'd like to share? And I want to break it up, because I think what I want to share with you is what I've experienced. And Laura, you may have seen this in your career consulting, is that I'm not only seeing young individuals wanting to enter the space sector, I'm also seeing mid-career individuals who are transitioning out of one industry and they want to transition into space. So I'm going to kind of tee that up. I'll start with you, Laura. What is that one piece of advice maybe for the young generation who are just wanting to enter? And what might be it for somebody who's looking to change careers and enter it at a mid-career point?
My experience mirrors yours, Shelly, in that I work with both students and mid-level professionals transitioning to space or working towards a space career. And it's actually majority mid-level professionals who want to come in. They've always had this dream of working in space and they didn't think it was for them, or they didn't know how to do it. And so first off, to students or to younger people who are listening, is to follow your own path, because I have found that people want to give really well-intentioned advice that are good for themselves and not great for you personally. And so you know your path, you know what you're interested in, you know that you have these certain skills or these certain callings, whatever it may be, you are the only one living your life. So go ahead and don't be afraid to pave your own path. It might not be, for me, I come from a more academic background where I was expected to become a postdoc. I was expected to become a professor, and that I knew early on that wasn't my path. So you have to pave your own path regardless of what other people might think and say, because it's you who's living your life. To the older people who might be watching, you don't necessarily need to go back to school, although you can if you want to. You don't necessarily need to have a STEM background, although it's great if you do and it's great if you don't, because space is involved everywhere and needs all kinds of people. I can't tell you how many businesses would be very, very, great. It would be great to hire business people for these businesses that are run by engineers that don't have a business background. I myself am a scientist trying to run a business. So I can definitely appreciate people who have that expertise or communication or, so many variety of skills. So you don't need to think that you need to change who you are in order to enter space. You can enter space as you are right now. And it's finding that intersection between your skills and experiences and what's needed in the space industry.
Excellent. So Nicole or Aaron, Nicole, you've hit your button first, so I'll let you go first.
Well, I think, yeah, I like what Laura said. And I think stepping outside of your comfort zone is probably a good category for exploration. So industry, we have seen industry evolve immensely in the last couple of years by those who have stepped outside of the box. So when Elon decided a reusable rocket would make sense, and we all said, there's no way that's going to work. Guess what? It's working. It's working beautifully. When even my former boss, Steve Collar, said, listen, we need to explore medium Earth orbit because we can help bridge the digital divide by providing fiber-like connectivity to places who have fiber disruption and other challenges. Our current founder of Ursa Space, Adam Maher, when he left a very stable 10-year business on the satellite side of things and said, you know what, I'm going to take a risk here. I believe in what's happening in the data analytics domain when it comes to bringing in the best of all these attributes of radar and Earth observation and doing something different. And so I think if we take those examples of industry stepping outside the box in order to take a giant leap forward, we as individuals should do the same thing. Don't be afraid to step outside of your comfort zone, take on a new challenge, learn something new, put your hand up and be counted in that process. And I think you personally will develop more for it and the industry will benefit as well.
And my experience has been that the space industry is looking for all kinds of folks with all kinds of different backgrounds. And you don't necessarily have to go to school for space to get into the space industry. You can jump into a position and learn the space sector because that's where we're at right now. There are not a lot of cybersecurity for space professionals. If you like cybersecurity, or even if you've never even explored it, but you're interested in it, then you can become also a cybersecurity for space professional as well. And there is a huge need, a growing need for people with an Intel background, people with social science background to be able to bring that maybe criminal justice, criminology, that type of experience to the space sector.
I think that's an excellent point, and I'll just talk about the Space Foundation that we launched our Center for Innovation and Education, and it's really about creating that lifelong learning platform for workforce development and economic opportunity, and that no matter where you are in the workforce pipeline, there's a way to enter the space industry, and we need individuals that have high school diplomas all the way to PhDs, whether you're doing data analytics, advanced manufacturing, or orbital debris removal. There is a place for you in the space ecosystem. So again, reach out. There are some great programs that offer mentorship, connect with the global space economy, whether it's through, Nicole, SSPI, Space Foundation, SGAC, Women Tech Network, WIA. There are a number of organizations that you can network into that can help you find a pathway into the space ecosystem and follow your path, like Laura said, follow your passion. So we are kind of winding down a little bit. I do want to answer, I see one question has come in and I think it's a really good one. And again, this is, someone has asked, how hard is it for the startup company to get into the space commerce? So Laura, I'll let you tackle that. Again, they're not telling me what sector. And again, that could be anything from being in the manufacturing sector to you're a launch provider. But Laura, I'll let you, since you're a consultant in that, kind of take that first, and then Nicole and Aaron. Aaron, you worked at Catalyst Campus, and then Nicole. So,
Yeah, again, it's helpful to not think of space as one solid industry. It is so different and so diverse in the number of different ways that you can enter space commerce. And so as someone who has worked for failed space companies, I know that any startup is risky, but if you don't take that choice, if you don't take that chance and risk it, then you're never going to win. So you might as well go ahead and try. If you've got all your ducks in a row and you think you have a great opportunity, why not?
Yeah, I think back to cybersecurity for space, there's a huge need out there. So if you're a startup that can provide a service related to cybersecurity for space, or a small business, it doesn't have to be like the shoot for the moon type thing, but if you're offering services that are needed by the sector and there's money to be spent on it, then there is a way in. Also, I did, as Shelly, you mentioned, I worked at the Catalyst Space Accelerator. I helped to launch that program at for the Air Force Research Lab. And what I saw there is that they're constantly looking to attract companies that are not part of space, but they have a dual use application for space. And we know that that's just broadening all of the time with the cross sector conversation we had earlier about how aviation, auto, IT, all of those sectors all interplay with space. So there's a lot of different ways that you can make your way into the space community if you, especially if you're a service provider company.
Yeah, I think avoiding the replication model is probably a good idea too when you're looking at creating a new space business. So finding your niche, finding the gap that you can help to solve for the community will help you be embraced by bigger participants as well. And in some cases, even sponsored. There are larger companies that will help seed these startups if they believe that they're going to bring value and contribute to an area where the rest of the community doesn't already have a solution. So, I guess it goes back to that point of feeling comfortable to step outside of the box a bit, do something different. Don't necessarily model yourself after what another business is doing at a larger scale, but instead find the niche, find the place where you can contribute value, and you'll be embraced, I think, fairly quickly.
Wonderful. Well, as we wind up down, I can't believe we've been talking for an hour. It's been a wonderful discussion. I would like to give each of you an opportunity to provide any closing comments, or did we miss? I'm sure we missed a lot, but did we miss anything that you'd really like to highlight to give our audience as a great takeaway?
Maybe just a quick comment for you, Shelly. Just given the headline of this panel, this could have gone in so many different directions where it was a deep dive on women's issues. That's not what you did with it. You allowed it to be subject matter expertise on a variety of really dynamic and important topics. And it just so happened that these incredible people here are all women at the same time. So hats off to you. Really appreciate that you took that approach here. And I hope that we continue to see others replicate what you've done going forward.
Yeah, I have to echo that sentiment. I really appreciate the approach that you took, and also want to encourage people not to make excuses. Don't put up false barriers to get into the space sector. Use what you've got. As all of us have communicated, you have the capability to enter the space sector with what you've got today. Just find your way.
Again, space is for all of us, for everyone globally. And so whoever you are, no matter what you come from, go ahead and, sorry, I got distracted there, but yeah, so go ahead and give it a shot and contact any one of us. I'm sure any of us would be happy to follow up with any questions that you have.
Well, fantastic. I took a couple selfies of us because this is the new way we take selfies, is looking at ourselves on a computer screen. We're all located on LinkedIn. So for those of you who are looking, Laura and Nicole and Aaron, we all talk on email, on LinkedIn, on Facebook. You can find us. You can follow Space Foundation. I would like to thank the America's Future Series for giving us the opportunity to have this really robust, in-depth dialogue with 3 dynamic leaders who just happen to be women. And now I'd like to, and I'd also like to thank the sponsors for the America's Future Series, because without sponsors, this isn't possible. So thank you. And thank you, General Radigi. Over to you.